Welcome to Stranger Connections, where I celebrate wonderfully weird people and quirky stories. I'm your curious beast and host, Lisa David Olson, the practically world famous business humorist, interactive speaker, and connection queen. So reach out if you want me to help reignite your team or event. Here's a quotey quote. The value of your speech isn't based on what you say on stage, but rather what your audience does once you're done saying it. Please welcome one of my mentors, Neil Gordon. I'm so nervous.
Thank you for having me, Lisa.
Yes. Are we both excited? I think at every podcast, we're both supposed to say, I'm excited to be here.
I'm very excited to be here, and I'm going to use my radio voice to say so.
It's winds from the southwest coming down Highway 42. So speaking of openings and maybe saying things that are just so cliche because we don't know how else to greet, what is one of the worst ways I could open a speech that I could take to the mic? I'd get on the stage, the mic is open, and I say what? That would be bad.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to be here. Oh, and how about a nice round of applause for the person who just introduced me?
Oh,
Isn't
Helen's
she
wonderful.
amazing? Yay. Oi.
Oh, your
It's
lunch looked good, everyone. I bet that was good lunch.
Oh yeah, are we a little bit tired and sleepy after having all of that great food? Yeah, the larger theme here, Lisa, is that every one of those kinds of things to say at the beginning of a speech is visiting with the audience. It's ingratiating themselves to the audience so as to fill in some space, so as to say, oh, I hope you like me, so I'm going to be polite and friendly with you right now.
Exactly. And now, because I can go in any order I want, now I'll introduce you properly. I didn't want to say it ahead of time. I wanted to just jump right in, and I can. So, Neil Gordon helps influencers to double their speaking fees, get six-figure book advances, and be seen on shows like, oh, you've heard of Ellen, maybe, or Dr. Oz. So, previously, Neil worked on the editorial staff of Penguin Random House, where he worked with New York Times best-selling authors. And now you are a master storyteller. I think you're a TikTok star. I don't really know how numbers correlate. And I want to talk to you about the silver bullet method, which we'll get to. So I just am so thrilled to have you here because you are the speaker for the speakers. And I think one of your main things is story. Why?
If we go all the way back to the late 90s, I remember the moment when stories became a conscious and deliberate part of my world. I was actually watching that show. Do you remember the show Ally McBeal?
I do.
Right? That super quirky show, Callista Flockhart, and Peter McNichol plays one of the senior partners of the firm that they all work at. And he's known as one of the best, if not the best, lawyer in Boston, where the show is set. And what I noticed is that he's this quirky little guy and was often very awkward with other people. But when he came to his summation at the end of the trial, and he would eventually win almost all of his cases, he would often start his summation with a story. And I wouldn't go so far as to say like a light bulb really went off. It was more a matter of I was so transfixed by his summations that I just started to notice a pattern. And within a season or two, I realized that he was telling stories in these summations. And I realized, even though it was a work of fiction, it planted the seed of possibility. What if storytelling was just universally this wonderful tool for persuading others of something, of communicating something intentionally and emotionally, but also meaningfully, like significantly. So that was the very beginning of what became a very long journey all these years later of being quite evangelical about if you have a talk, if you have a book, if you have an article, if you're on a podcast, that you might use stories as a way to really convey the significance of something and reach people on that both emotional and intellectual level.
That's solid because I do crafting, I do painting things. If you put a story with something you're selling, and I don't
Mm.
know if it's just mostly to female, but we buy emotionally. So you could
Mhm.
have this crappy candle And I could tell you this beautiful story about the essence of the oil and how it was squeezed by monks in the mountains and all these things. And you're like, oh, I'm going to support them and I'm going to buy this candle.
Yeah,
And we buy that way. I'm making fun of all of us. So hate me. But it is true. We buy emotionally as well as absorb emotionally. We're going to, we're going to remember the story more than the data. True?
absolutely. I remember when I did a yoga teacher training many years ago, and I decided when the training was over to rent out a space and have a yoga class. And so I invited a bunch of people, and half the people who came were from my yoga teacher training, which was very nice of them. And I remember starting the class with a story about a recipe a friend of mine had given me and how I started to experiment with the recipe. And that thematically became very relevant to the yoga class itself. I was very deliberate about this stuff. And it was a good indication that I shouldn't have been a yoga teacher, that I should have been a communication expert. And so I went back to the school where we all took the yoga training. And a month later, I ran into a couple of people who were also in my teacher training. We were all talking, and they were talking about the Neil class and how much fun the Neil class was. And I actually gave, like, there were these little energy balls that you make with nut butter. And I gave it to everyone, a little bag with a couple of these energy balls at the end, just to kind of tie it all together. And I thought it was just going to be, they were going to talk about the energy balls. So I asked one of them who was there that day, I said, but do you remember what the point of the energy balls was? And she then recited for me the lesson that was inherent in that opening story verbatim a month later.
Wow.
Like,
Seriously.
just like it just stuck. It was such a great example of that.
Meaning she felt it.
She felt it,
Yeah. Yeah, I've
right?
been doing a lot of TEDx training with a group that I'm with right now, and
Yeah.
they're basically saying, you mentioned this gal Alice, and then you started going into data and you had your slide up and there was a lot of words. And how can we hear you talk about Alice when we're looking at this slide that is so many words, I can't read it and hear you.
Oh, yeah.
Slides or no slides, Neil?
So I believe in the value of slides if they were used in a way that I would deem appropriate. Now, what you just described there, Lisa, is the larger problem that so many speakers face and deal with, in that people are talking, they're on stage and they're talking, and they have the screen next to them with their slides on display. What so many speakers do, and it sounds like what they were gratefully steering you away from, is what so many speakers do is that they put a slide up that's competing for the audience's attention with whatever the speaker is saying. And so when you put a slide up that's got all this information, all these bullet points and all of these, some big complicated chart or graph, whatever it is, and you're talking about something else, that means in that moment there is this moment of friction that they're not, the audience isn't necessarily aware of, but there's this friction that makes them think, oh, wait, should I be looking at this and reading what is on the slide, or should I be listening to what the speaker is saying? And so I'm not against slides. I'm against when slides are not being used to simply supplement in the moment whatever the speaker is saying. So
Mm-hmm.
instead of all of that stuff on the slide, what if you just had a phrase or a sentence, and you say the sentence and then they see it on the screen and then they go right back to you because there's nothing else to see on the screen. And if you want to have a bunch of bullets, which is totally possible, I'm not against bullet points. I'm against just putting them all up on the screen at the same time. And so you could just start with the first bullet point and you could talk about that. And then you then animate the next one, but you don't do it until you're ready to talk about it.
Right. Don't let them read ahead.
Right, exactly. You always want to be sort of like, I made this analogy to what was it? It was Malcolm Gladwell back in The Tipping Point, that book he wrote all those years ago. He refers to how Blue's Clues, the children's story, the children's program,
With
was a departure.
Steve.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I don't remember Steve myself because this was after my time. But the innovation was, instead of these little vignettes that Sesame Street had, it was a single narrative over the course of an entire show. It was very linear and very deliberate, but very slow. And I've thankfully never been subjected to such slow programming. But the point of the show, as I'm relating to it here, is that much like, as I understand that show is designed to just very deliberately take this young child's attention and go from one thing to the next, you want to basically do that with your slides if you're going to use them. You're going to want to say, here's what I want you to look at now. I was just doing this. A client of mine just gave his talk today. And in preparing the slides in the last couple of weeks, there was one graph that he had that had all these statistics on it. It's like, oh no, this is a great graph. I just want you to animate the points that you want them to look at as you talk about it. So there's never any ambiguity as to what to look at any given moment.
Right. Very well said. Yes. Tell them what you're telling them and point it out and highlight it like we used to do with a pointer. And then we used to do with a laser pointer. Now we can do with all the fancy slides that we can bring in one
That's right.
point at a time. If,
Exactly.
yeah, if you can do it without slides, even better, or just use a photo, or you are an artist, right? You do all your animated things.
I do cartoons, and
Yeah.
I just recently commissioned a guy on Fiverr to animate those cartoons. He's brilliant. He's in
So cool.
Brazil, and he's just like wonderful at what he does. And so my goal in the longer term is to start presenting in a way where I actually bring him in animated form into my slide deck. And even if I was giving like a how to be a good speaker kind of presentation, I could see, I haven't done this yet, but down the line when I'm ready to, I'm going to model a really bad speaker, sort of like what we were just doing just now when I was pretending
Yes.
to be this speaker with a really lame opening. And then he's going to interrupt from the slide deck and we're going to have a little banter and stuff. And that down the line, like I said, when I'm ready to do that. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that because that character, I started drawing that character in 2000.
Oh, yeah. And if people can follow you, I send people to you all the time,
I
just by
appreciate
going to neilcanhelp.com, and we'll certainly
it.
wrap up with that as well.
Yeah.
And you've been taking to TikTok with Neil Can Help on TikTok. And
Yeah.
I'm looking at some of your views. I was looking again today. I think, I don't know, I'm not great with numbers. I know it was in the 2000s where you were talking about the TEDx with the guy that was the pickpocket, and everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, let me hear about this." So you get a lot of views. People want to know. And a big reminder is this isn't just about doing a big keynote or TEDx or anything like that. This also works for crucial conversations. It could be you
Mm.
presenting to 10 team members, or it could be you having to meet with your supervisor.
Yeah.
Don't knock out the stumbly words, get to it, get their attention, and kind of control the conversation in a gentle sense.
Absolutely. There are a lot of very nuanced distinctions between how you can apply concepts like what I teach on TikTok and elsewhere to an informal conversation with a supervisor or colleague or whoever it might be that you're trying to get to buy into something. And when you're on stage persuading people, something like you will be doing soon with your next TEDx talk. However, the concepts fundamentally are the same. What you're looking to do when it comes to persuasion is convince others that change is possible. A manager is going to dismiss their underlings initiative or idea if they just don't think it can happen. Just like a person could go and see a speaker at a conference and not scan the QR code or buy the book at the back of the room or go up afterward and say, how can I work with you? Or whatever it is that the next step might be. They're not going to do that if they don't believe that change is possible, that they could enjoy that change in some sort of meaningful and substantive way.
What I like about that is saying change is possible. You're saying don't just get up there and present. Have a reason. And this goes back to that um, of me quoting you at the opening. The value of your speech isn't based on what you say on stage, but rather what your audience does once you're done saying it. So
Right.
give people an urge to have this call to action, this, wow, that moved me. I need to try this.
Right. Right. Exactly. when you go up on stage with this larger intention to serve your audience, but also very clearly and kindly show them how this expertise that you're bringing to light can actually help and how possible it is for them to implement it themselves, then your work is done, at least in terms of the keynote or the TED talk or whatever it is that you're doing on stage. You've done your job when they decide to go deeper, because it's that decision and the actions that they take that's going to lead to the change. It's not because you're really funny or really inspiring or whatever it is. It's because they're taking action.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't ultimately do what needs to be done to convince them that they can take action, then you haven't, in my opinion, at least, that I very firmly stand by, you haven't done your job as speaker and as expert.
Right. And especially in the world that it's all scroll, scroll, point, click, you better grab them. What? Towards the middle, towards the end? Where should we grab people with our speech? I'm setting you up to
Oh,
talk about the silver bullet.
we're going to circle back to the original, our little play acting moment, is that as soon as you, instead of saying thank you so much and it's so nice to be here, what I want everyone to do, and this is more so in terms of live talks, this is not for virtual talks over Zoom or such things. There are other things that you can do to begin a Zoom based or virtual based talk, but when it comes to being live with your audience right there in the room with you, I want you to, and this is especially if you're being introduced by someone else, you go out there, maybe you acknowledge them just visually, you just look at them for a moment to show them that you know that they're there. But instead of visiting with them and ingratiating yourselves, you could just start with a really powerful opening line, or even just an opening line. It doesn't have to be super powerful. One of my favorite client success stories with this technique is a client of mine went out on stage and she just simply said, a longtime friend of mine didn't know what to do.
Ooh,
She
I
just
need to know
started,
more. That's
yeah,
enticing.
it's enticing. It's a crisis. It's like, does she make it out of the crisis? Does what happens? And it just sets a completely different tone, because people put down or put away their phones like, oh, he started. I better pay attention.
Oh, yeah, we're nosy by nature. We don't need you to thank who brought you out and all that, or talk about the venue because it isn't there a stat, something like you have 3 seconds to win them over, or what is I made that up, I'm sure, but between what you're
There's,
wearing and how you're
yeah,
standing.
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of science and a lot of observations that have been made about the value of body language and the way we present ourselves. And some people say that the words you say don't even matter. I don't believe that's true. Although I recently was made known of a study that I appreciated very much, where I think it was done out of Harvard, where when it came to pitching venture capitalists, the best predictor of whether someone got a deal or not was in their body language, as opposed to what they said. Obviously, the VCs needed to like the idea too, but people could watch a video without any sound and just watch the confidence and the body language and the presence of the speaker and determine if they got a deal or not. And they were much
Yeah.
more accurate than those who could hear what the speaker said. So
Yeah,
there is that, but that's in a very specific context for speaking.
and that's why there's a red dot for TEDx's is you're not to leave that red circle because there's video set up and
Yeah.
there's lights set up and they want to keep people from pacing around and getting out of the lights. They want the best video, but it's also to keep people stay put and tell us what you're going to tell us.
Yeah. Yeah. I often think rather fondly of Ken Robinson's very famous TED talk, the one that has the most views of any talk there is. He apparently had polio or something. There was some kind of physically debilitating thing. So he was not very light on his feet. And so he walks out and he just stands there and has some basic gesture with his arms and hands, but basically he just stands there and he just so completely mesmerizes and captivates the audience that you don't need to be super animated and super active and all over the place in order to win over an audience. Again, the thing you need to win over an audience is to convince them that change is possible. And that can happen on all sorts of levels and in all sorts of ways.
Convincing that change is possible, you still have to win them over right at the beginning so they'll even listen to you. And nowadays, yes, we have to compete with people pulling out their phones or doing other things.
Mhm.
So when I worked with you the first time a few years back, you really helped me craft my silver bullet, which is getting to that hook. And why should they even listen to me? And that's why my first TEDx starts with, "Can humor save your life?" And I
Mm.
think that's similar to what your other client had stated about something that her friend did wrong or something like that. I think if we entice people and draw them in, then we can at least get to our point and get through all the nerves and deliver that speech that's within us so that we can convince them of change.
Absolutely. And what I imagine our listeners would benefit from, Lisa, is like we've talked about the silver bullet and we've talked about how to open the talk. What we're referring to here is a secret sauce like sentence, a thing that really captures to what you just said just a moment ago, really getting to your point. And that's perhaps the most colloquial way to describe what a silver bullet is your point. What is the point of the talk? What is the recipe for future success that the audience can really wrap their mind around? So when you started with, I think you called a quotey quote at the beginning, you said the value of your speaking is not what you say on stage, but rather what your audience does once you're done saying it. And that's actually one of my silver bullets. It's this cause and effect sentence that you see in almost every one of the top TED Talks. And you see as the most highlighted passages in nonfiction books on the Kindle. And you see it again and again. You see it from Socrates and Aristotle and Sun Tzu. And it's this one cause and effect sentence that shows up again and again. And that's not a tagline. And it's not even the hook at the beginning of your talk, usually. What it is something that's usually buried halfway, 2/3, three-quarters of the way through a talk. And that ultimately becomes the thing that is the audience's takeaway, the moral of the story, the lesson that they could then make actionable on their own moving forward.
Have you ever worked with somebody and not been able to find their silver bullet?
Ooh, I would say that a couple of times over the years, when we're talking about many people, I'm guessing it's still in the high hundreds, at least. I don't think I've gotten to the thousands quite yet, but it's been many speakers and experts with whom I've done it. And two, maybe three times, we didn't get to something. And I that still weighs heavy on my heart, to be quite honest. I think of those people on a somewhat regular basis because it might have just been back then, I wasn't setting up a process that led to it, or sometimes I'm loath to think that it wasn't there. If somebody has an idea, then they have a silver bullet. If they're deviating from conventional thinking, then they absolutely have a silver bullet. And my clients usually come to me with unconventional ideas. So it should be there. So it's happened a couple of times. I'm
Oh
sad to
yeah,
say.
and I'm certainly not trying to call you out, but
Oh yeah. Yeah.
what it makes me think of is maybe they didn't have enough information in their talk. And I'm not doing a blame game or anything, but it made me think of times I've tried to craft a talk or write comedy, and it completely, this whole sketch I wrote becomes a punchline for something else. And as hard as it is to give up this fantastic sketch in my mind,
Yeah.
that working as a punchline somewhere else made it just perfect. And you have to know when to let it go and to reform it or recraft it.
Yeah. 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 It's possible that whatever the hangup was might have just been on not a lack of clarity around the language, but a lack of clarity around what the thing actually is, which could be coming from the client in this regard. It's possible.
Hmm.
I do take my clients' outcomes very seriously, and I do very much want those who engage with me to get a meaningful and substantive outcome.
I'm
As
going to tell you something you're doing wrong if you want to know. Even if you don't want to know, it's my show.
okay.
You give away so much free content online
Hmm.
that I just find it ridiculous. I'm just like, why is he not just making them pay for this? But now that I've seen it all, and I'll sign up for things. You're like, you already know this. You already signed up. I know, but I just want to see it. So you do. You give away so many great great things online. And I just want to really encourage people to go to neilcanhelp.com, but also anytime you're ready to have a discovery call, it's always extremely helpful and clarifying. You cannot write on your own. You cannot write without somebody to bounce it off of and hear it outside of your head.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that, Lisa. And my attitude about giving away the value, it more and more goes to, I'm going to attract people who see the value and they trust in my ability to deliver value. And they're going to come to me simply because they understand the value of collaboration and having a thought partner in the things that they hold most dear. And a lot of people won't see it that way, and they can take the free stuff and run with it, and that's great too. At the end of the day, I'm not going to be for everybody. I'm going to
Hmm.
be for people who really put a value on nuance and really see the opportunity to go into this playground and really find the most exquisite aspects of their expertise and the things that they're here to offer. And because of how exquisite it is, I'd say that a lot of value and a lot of free stuff helps them to see it possible for themselves, as we've been
It's
talking about.
it's always so helpful. And even if you've been through things, it's always good to go back because you cannot keep it all in your head. But you have,
Yeah.
what else do you offer? I know you have one-on-one. Is
Mhm.
there, what else do you have going on?
I have a self-led course on putting together your signature talk, and I do something in a similar way for writing a how-to book. And there are other smaller offers as well, like various information products that help with a certain part of the talk here or there. And on that goes. And really, the one on one work winds up just being where I'm happiest in terms of being able to tailor the work. I'm thinking about exploring a potential group dynamic that I could see working, but it's in a very early gestation phase. And so we're going to see how that goes. And I'm also thinking I would need to see a lot of demand for it before I committed to it, of doing an even higher end book writing process where I actually provide daily writing assignments for like a 3-month period, so that there's very little questioning, like there's very little guesswork as to what needs to be worked on in any given day. I believe that's what helps someone to really write a book of substance and be less scared of it. But again, I haven't pulled the trigger on that because I just need to find the right time and the right group of people to do that with.
That's a lot of variables between writing and talking and coaching. So fantastic. And
Yeah.
how is it? This goes a little more personal. How is it that a person yourself
Mhm.
who really didn't get into even reading much until you were, I think, 20, and then you go on to work at a major publishing company? How does that just happen?
It's funny. So the arc goes that when I was in first grade, I was tested to be in the 99th percentile for reading and language, which is as high as you can go. And by seventh grade, I'd gone down to the 54th percentile. And the first time I took the SATs in my sophomore year of high school, I got a 330 verbal, which put me in the 5th percentile of everyone who took the SATs that year. And so down and down my reading comprehension went because I just hated reading from about the age of about 7. I loved it with the picture books. Then we got to novels, and there's some more complicated layers that we don't have time for here, but there's a lot of therapy that's going into what happened at that time of my life. That being said, I started picking up reading again in the second half of college for leisure. And then I moved to New York City in right after graduating, and I hated the subway. And frankly, I hated the city at first. It's home now, but back then I really, it was too much. And so books became my escape from the subway. And a friend gave me a book that I thought was just going to be a light read like the other things, but it was A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving. And it so completely shattered my worldview, the way that book unfolds, that I spent several years just reading everything I could by John Irving and a bunch of other books too, just to analyze how could language have such a profound impact on me. And that self-led exploration was enough to get the respect and attention of a vice president, editorial director at Penguin. And that got me the job.
Wow. Does your friend know that? The friend that gave you that book? Do you think they know that?
I had told him several times over the years how much his influence, I mean, he knows that I went into publishing and he knows that how little I read before. He was the one feeding me all these books, and then he fed me that book. And so he's well aware of how much that process in general impacted the trajectory of my life. I don't honestly know if he knows what A Prayer for Owen Meany did for me, and I'm gonna reach out to him and ask him that.
Well, let's bring him in right now. Here's
Yeah.
no. That'd be so cool. That is, I love that story. And it's really saying never say never, because all of a sudden you just, the timing was right. You were ready. And then you end up working at a major publishing company.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
wouldn't have seen that when you were in high school.
No, no, absolutely not. It was just kind of funny how that all worked out. And I wound up developing an affinity for nonfiction while I was there. And so by the time I left Penguin, I basically was just interested really in the nonfiction how-to kind of world. So
So
here
cool.
we are.
Wow. And that was before you could just Google it. Just probably a little bit pre-Google, right? Before you could
Yeah.
find the DIY stuff and
Oh yeah, yeah, no.
nonfiction, like, how do I do this? Well,
Yeah.
I need to ask you before I release you,
Mhm.
to share a dare or a prank story, either one you have done or had done to you.
All right. So when I was a freshman in college, I went to away to school. It was a few hours away, and we had a fall break halfway through the first semester. And that fall break was maybe just for like 4 days. And so it's more of a question mark as to whether or not students would go home for that, because it's not that long. And I told my parents I wasn't going to go home. But then I decided that I wanted to go home, but I didn't tell them. And so I got a ride with a couple of other people I went to school with who lived in my area. And I wound up having them park, not even in the driveway, like on the street, out of sight. And then I just kind of almost like cartoon like tiptoed down the driveway and didn't enter the front door. I walked around to the side, opened a bedroom window, took off my shoes, took off my jacket, left my bag in the bedroom, and then just walked into the dining area and just asked what's for dinner. And they flipped out, understandably so.
That is so great. Right away, mom's like, set a place for Neil.
Yeah.
That's so great.
But mom sounds a little bit like Fran Drescher, the nanny. So it's like, set a place for Neil.
Ah, what a great story. And no one got hurt, hopefully. I mean, some pranks, I don't like the ones where people get hurt, but that could have
And
set people into a
the cops
medical.
weren't called on me when I crawled through the window, because that could look pretty sketchy outside.
That's a little disturbing that one, you can so easily get in there,
Yeah,
and two, nobody gave a crap. So there's that.
small town America.
Well, I was surprised it wasn't the FITN philosophy that you shared, but I love your story. What is that,
Oh.
you ask? The finger in the nose philosophy. Do we explain that?
Oh, going all the way back 20 years ago now to when I I was in the very tail end of my marriage. In fact, my ex-wife and I knew that we were not going to be married anymore. And she was turning 30 and wanted to go to Vegas for her 30th birthday. And she hadn't transitioned to a life without Neil. So she said, would you come with me just to go and do the thing? And so we kind of went as friends in a way. And I actually like gambling and going to casinos now. I had no interest in it back then. And I was pretty self-righteous about so many things. So I thought that Vegas was beneath me. So I said, all right, I'll make a deal with you. I will go with you if you indulge me in taking some random pictures of me interacting with Vegas. And so I did all these random things. But one of the things that just kept coming up was me putting my finger in statues' noses because they were there. And of course, I'm going to put my finger in it. That was the birth of what has become a very deep-seated passion for me now, Lisa, including
Oh,
and I do not use Instagram for business. My entire Instagram account is nothing but me putting my finger in statues' noses.
I didn't know that. Okay, that's even better.
Nothing but that. Well, you see them on Facebook because I have it connected. So when I post something on Instagram, it shows up on Facebook too.
Oh, gotcha.
Facebook is for other things as well,
Yeah.
but Instagram is exclusively for that.
I love the demeanor exclusively for the finger in the nose. Well, thank you so much. I'm honored, always honored to chat with you, Neil Gordon. And remember that we can only be strangers once. And I invite you to stay weird. You can say something.
Oh, I can say something?
Yeah.
It was so clean. It was just such a clean,
Oh,
incongruent.
well, a lot of people just say, oh, I am weird, or oh, you can count on it. So I invite you to stay weird.
I will absolutely, I just told you about my Instagram. You know I'm staying weird.
Thank you.